And thank you for joining us during the online postgraduate webinar for our PhD at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. My name is Rebecca and I'm a Senior Marketing Officer here at the University of London School of Advanced Study. I'm joined today by Programme Director Dr. Susan Breau. Firstly, this is just a reminder that the application deadline for this programme is the 31st of July this year for the September intake. I hope this webinar today answers all your questions about studying for a PhD with us and you'll be on your way to submitting your application. For the first part of the webinar, Susan will be talking through her presentation about studying the programme and how you can benefit from it. Following the presentation, there'll be a live Q&A where we want to answer as many questions as you have about studying with us. So please post your questions in the chat box on the left-hand side of the screen. We'll be answering your questions live on camera, and we also have a specialist team answering on the chat box. So please do keep an eye out to see if your question has been answered there. Right, I think we're ready to begin. Susan, it would be great if you could give us a brief introduction about yourself and then start the presentation.
Well, hello, everybody. As you can tell from my accent, I'm a Canadian. I am a professor of international law, and I work at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. I have the honor of being the director of the doctoral program at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. As you can see from this lovely slide, I love looking at it. We're based downtown London at Russell Square, and it really is a spectacular city, as you can see. One that I fell in love with many years ago. Next slide, thank you. So as I said, we are going to talk today about the MPhil PhD at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. Next slide. The Institute of Advanced Legal Studies is a part of the School of Advanced Study at the University of London. Now, what is an institute? Well, basically, it is not a law department. What it is a research center. And specifically, what we do is we do postgraduate education. We offer a master's degree in legislative drafting, and we also offer our MPhil PhD. The Institute of Advanced Study, School of Advanced Study has many other institutes. And one of the interesting parts about this is that all of these institutes have events and we join together on a university training scheme, which I think is world leading in educating students and indeed young academics in research skills across the country and in fact globally. One of the webinars we had recently, there were over 400 people. So this is a very popular site for the education of research skills around the United Kingdom and in fact globally. Thanks, next slide. So the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies has been around for a long time. It was founded in 1947, so 80 years almost, part of the University of London. It's a national academic institution. As I said, it's a postgraduate institution, and the aims are the prosecution and promotion of legal research and training of graduate students in its principles and methods. There's also a statement that I wanted to read to you as well on the web about it, if I can find it. Give me a sec here. I just thought it was a brilliant statement. It serves all universities in the United Kingdom through its National Legal Research Library. Its function is to promote, facilitate, and disseminate the results of advanced study and research in the discipline of law for the benefit of persons and institutions in the UK and abroad. And our PhD program is an essential part of that promotion and research of the development of law. Next slide, please. Thank you. So if you look at the website of the Institute of Advanced Studies, you will see we have a very small staff. We have 3 professors. I'm one of the 4 professors now. One just got a promotion. We have a lecturer, our associate professor, and we have a lecturer. So we have about 4, 5, 6, 7 staff maybe in all. But what we do have, because of our long-standing role as leaders in the field of law, we have what are called research fellows, both senior and junior research fellows. And when I put the whole areas of expertise, this isn't the areas of expertise of our staff, otherwise we would be doing 10 different things, but it is the expertise of many of our fellows. And in fact, we have a new professor, Anat Rosenberg, who has been appointed in the specialized field of law and humanities. And we now offer an interdisciplinary PhD that one can take in law and humanities. So as I said, this list here is not even complete. We have a group now, in fact, that are doing a lot of work in law and technology, AI. So it keeps changing, and we have another group that's working on access to justice. I'm a public international lawyer, so we have a lot of areas of law that we cover, and I'll explain the process in a minute about how you might access this expertise. Thanks. Next slide. We also have two research centers, the Sir William Dale Center for Legislative Studies. This is a specific area of what I call legislative drafting, assisting members of parliaments and governments across the globe. For example, we recently had visitors from Saudi Arabia. We also are going to be entertaining Chinese visitors later on this year. We also have an information law and policy center. This is information technology, media, access to your information, and it runs an annual conference. So those are our research centers as part of our institute. Next slide, please. So let's go into the details of the MPhil PhD program. You can go directly to the next slide. Thank you. So first of all, let's explain what an MPhil PhD is. You are not enrolled initially in a doctoral program. You are enrolled in a Master's of Philosophy leading to a PhD. And that's not an insult. It's basically a process by which students are assessed during their degree to ensure that they would be able to complete a doctorate. And so what are the qualifications? Generally, it's a law degree at either undergraduate or postgraduate with a 2-1 mark or merit. But I should say there are exceptions. A master's degree that's related to law, such as criminology, gender studies, human rights. We have a number of people who've done tax or commercial master's degrees. But what I say to students who are going to do a law PhD is it's much better if one of your 2 degrees has focused on law, because the learning curve would be very steep if you didn't have a legal background at all. The proposal is the critical part. If you apply for a PhD, you need to have a project in mind that you want to do. And what I've said to students, particularly my mature students, it's almost as if you have a book in your head. There's something you want to write, a project you want to do. It's got the proposal, and by the way, when people email me, and my email will be later on in the slides, we'll make sure we put it in the chat if it's not. I say to students that I give them the guideline that it is very important that there be a structure, that there be evidence that you've looked at the wider literature, that there's evidence of how your methodology is going to be used to do your research. Is it interviews? Is it a literature review? And you need to do research and prepare for this. It's not something you can just write off the top of your head. This is almost a research project in itself to develop the research proposal. And the most important thing is that this has got to be an original contribution to law literature. Now, when I say original, we're not scientists. We're not inventing the cure for cancer. I understand that. But it has to be an angle or an approach to a legal issue that hasn't been studied before. Now, that isn't as difficult as it sounds. because in fact law is so complex and is developing so quickly. There's often new issues, new country situations, new wars, new trade wars that are going on now. As you can imagine, as a Canadian, I'm very concerned about trade wars right now. So there's all sorts of new things that come up in law that can be studied. So it's not as difficult, but the main thing we have to ensure when we're looking at an application is that it's actually going to result in a research project that makes a novel contribution to legal literature. And ideas and plans change. How I put that on the note is that in conversation with your potential supervisor, which I will discuss in a minute, it may be that you alter your project. There's no problem with that at all. And in fact, some people change their title towards the end of their thesis. That isn't a difficulty. But you really have to have established to get to this level that you've done a well-researched research proposal. It is the most important criteria for admission. Thank you. Next slide. So the review process is, I review your qualifications. I review the proposal. If the proposal is well developed, I search for supervisors. Now, at that stage, you could be stopped. And let me tell you why you would be stopped. There are times when I look at a proposal and I think we do not have the research expertise to supervise this particular project. I do not have on my list of fellows or my list of staff, academic staff, someone who could supervise this project. And that does happen on a frequent basis, that we look at a proposal and say, I'm sorry. And sometimes it's because recently I had someone who presented a proposal. In fact, it was just yesterday that I was looking at it, that was country specific. They wanted to look at the law in a specific country. Well, if that country's not the United Kingdom, we've got a problem, because we don't have experts for every country in the world. There's 198 countries. We do not have country expertise. The legal system, and what I say to students there is you should be looking in your own country for universities and professors who specialize in the law in your own country. Now, that doesn't happen very often, by the way, because many students are aware of our remit, that we tend to do multi-country studies, that we tend to look at legal issues on a global level or on a European level or on a theoretical level. But it does periodically happen that somebody wants to do a specialized topic on a specific country-specific topic, and we cannot find an available supervisor. Now, if in the good news that we reviewed your qualifications and I've been able to find 2 supervisors, a primary and a secondary, you then have an interview with the proposed supervisors and myself to make sure that that supervision team is a match. Now, when I say I've searched for supervisors, I can assure you that I also check with the student to make sure they're happy that I contact these potential supervisors. No one forces you to work with a supervisor. And if it's someone you disagree with, you might say, no, I really don't want to work with this person because I don't think they have the specific expertise. That's absolutely fine. But in consultation with the student, and we found the supervisors, then you have an interview. You may then be either accepted on the spot, usually, or you may be required to amend the proposal. The supervisor has some concerns and wants you to amend the proposal, and then they will consider it again. At that point, if the amended proposal, you don't have to go for a second interview. It's basically the supervisor will look at the amended proposal, and then they will make a decision. Either the proposal is still not something they can work with, and unfortunately that would be a rejection, or it would be an acceptance that the supervisor is perfectly happy. This is why, as I say, that proposal is everything. It is so important. Next slide, please. Now, so the good news is you've been accepted into the PhD program at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, and you've been enrolled firstly as an MPhil student leading to a PhD. And I have put down the various milestones in your degree. The first, after 1 year of full-time and 2 years of part-time, you have a progression review where you basically do an outline of your thesis and one chapter. That is done by your supervisor, and you are progressed, and most people, it isn't a difficulty. You are progressed to the next stage. And the next stage is the upgrade. In another year after that, 2 years full-time, 4 years part-time, you do have an examination. This examination is about 3 chapters of your thesis, an outline. Oh, sorry, could you go back? An outline of the thesis, and you'll probably be asked about your research methodology, your research questions, and at that point, congratulations, you will be upgraded to PhD status. In other words, you will no longer be an MPhil student, you will be a PhD student. And then in 1 year after that, or 2 years on a part-time basis, you will have finished your thesis and you proceed to what's called the viva, which is an oral examination with one external examiner and one internal examiner. I should say it's the same for an upgrade. One external, one internal, and internal also includes our fellows. And you would be examined, and at that point, you would be either confirmed as a doctor in philosophy at the University of London, or you may have some corrections to perform before your degree is finalized, or there's trouble. Now, that's very rare, because what happens is during the milestones, the progression review and the upgrade, we pick up if there are problems and we work with you to fix those problems before you submit your thesis for examination. Now, the other milestone that's very important, that 2 of them that we offer here at the University of London, that is quite frankly superb. Our supervision process is very robust. As I said, we have 2 supervisors. They are to meet with their students on a monthly basis, and the student files a report of that meeting, which the supervisor then signs off on. Every 6 months, there is a meeting of the Research Degrees Committee that reviews your progress. And again, the supervisor and yourself have to do a progress report. That's all very important so that we can pick up if there are any difficulties in your study process. And the last one, which is a requirement of the degree, is to attend training and development courses. And now you can go to the next slide, which outlines those. So we have, and there's one that's actually no longer in place because we've got another exciting one. We have, in addition to the dozens and dozens of courses that are offered by the School of Advanced Study, we have a bespoke legal training program, which is free to enrolled students at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. In January, we offer an introduction to research methods for law, which goes on for a couple of weeks. It is all online. All of our training programs are online now because we have both distance and in-person, but most of our students now are distance learning. The How to Get a PhD in Law has been changed to the PhD Masterclasses, which actually start this month, and they're 3 days over a period of 3 months, where we talk about, so you've had your introduction to research methods in January. The reason we do January is we have 2 intakes a year. We have one in late September, early October, and one in January. So we want to make sure that all of the students have access to the research methods, so because it's so critical. And in the PhD Masterclasses, we offer discussions about relationship with your supervisor. If you go back, relationship with your supervisor, your theoretical approach. We're going to have talks about law and technology, decolonizing law, various theories of research and law that's done by one of our staff members, Mahmoud Bagheri. We're launching this as a national program. It is available to PhD students from across the country, but as I said, it is available to our students on a free basis. The other thing, as I said, there is training at our superb IALS library. The library guides at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. You can even have bespoke one-on-one sessions with our librarians to discuss your PhD research. That is superb. And I have to say that library is famous for being, I would say, one of the top legal libraries in the world. There's no question about it. And as I already mentioned, there's research training at the School of Advanced Study where they have literally dozens of courses on interviews, on research methods, from the beginning of your PhD to even trying to apply for a job. So it's got all sorts of different courses available. Okay, next slide. So as I said, we monitor our students' progress, and this is important to make sure someone isn't paying tuition for a project that they can't complete. So as I said, we have research degrees committee that meets biannually every 6 months. We also have an academic quality and standards committee, which considers our regulations. I have to say, given that we teach a lot of legal people, sometimes they spot problems in our regulations that are not clear, and we amend our regulations through the Academic Quality and Standards Committee. Also, if students need an extension on their enrollment, it goes through that committee. And finally, there's a research ethics committee. All students who enroll in a doctoral program have to fill out early, within their first year, an ethics form, particularly those students who want to do interviews. This is an absolutely critical part of the doctoral journey. Next slide, please. So we have a research culture at the Institute that is quite extraordinary. As I said, it's a student-centered learning environment. We have a student rep. We even have a WhatsApp group for our students. You've seen the list of research centers at the School of Advanced Studies, but we're also in the middle of legal London. Birkbeck, SOAS are right next to us. UCL is just down the street. You're literally in the middle of academic London with the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. As I said, cross-school interdisciplinary seminars, particularly those that are now being convened by Professor Anat Rosenberg and what's called the L Hub. You should get online and look at that. This is law and English, law and history, law and art, law and media. It's fascinating. We also have a number of research conferences done through our Information Policy Center, but also a wide variety of subjects that our fellows might be interested in. We've had some fascinating seminars on legal history, on, recently law reform in Canada. We have visiting judges who give seminars, and that's all available usually online. There are some that are in person, but usually our seminars are online, available across the globe. And we even have a journal, Amicus Curiae, where students could submit draft articles. It's not guaranteed you'd be published. They have to be good, but we do have a journal of our own. And if you look at News Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, you can get some more information about it. Also, for those of you who do visit London, the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, I have to say it's one of the ugliest buildings in London, but inside it has been completely renovated and it is really quite a wonderful space. Next slide. Here's what I mean. So that's the ugly building in the corner, the 17 Russell Square. Doesn't look too bad from this picture, but it's what's called brutalist architecture. And now that the movie, The Brutalist, has been on, people know what brutalist architecture is. Our library has been completely redone since I was a student 20 years ago. It's quite interesting. As you see, there's lots of study spaces, places to sit. That's because most people work online these days. And we have a library newsletter. Now, the transformation project, I think I've got to take that off because I think we have been transformed. We've done that. All of that has been done. Next slide, please. And this is the pièce de la résistance. This is our PhD study room. This is right next to my office. If you can see out the window, it overlooks the Senate House. It has its own kitchen. It has its own workspaces. It has its own meeting spaces. It is a fabulous place to study. I can tell you, I didn't have any such beautiful place when I studied for my doctorate at LSE. It is really quite, and although it's empty now in this picture, because I did it later in the day, students do use it and are given access cards to come in. And even if you're visiting, some students, distant students, come to London for a bit to meet their supervisor or go to a conference, you're more than welcome to use it. Next slide. I think I'm done here. Yes, so what I can say, as you can tell I'm enthusiastic, is that I think that the PhD program at IALS is truly transformative. I mean, we have people from all over the world studying distance learning. We have supervisors from all over the world. We have a huge list of research fellows who are keen to supervise students. And I think it is a remarkable program. So I will stop there and see if there's questions.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was really interesting. And I hope it's already answered some of your questions. We're now going to move on to the live Q&A. And I can see that there are already some questions in the chat box, but please keep asking any questions you might have and we will get through them. So first question, how should I prepare to study at PhD level? And how does the teaching style differ from a master's degree?
Excellent question, because I've gotten a few questions, particularly from international students, about whether we teach. We do not teach.
Yeah.
There is no teaching within the PhD study. It is a research project. Basically, you are working with your supervisors. You're not working alone. You're working with the guidance of your supervisors to write 100,000 words, which, as I said, is a small book, a thesis. And that is what you do over the 3 years. And if you write consistently, it is easy to write 100,000 words. A friend of mine used to say, if those of you who are working, if you look at what you write in a week in your job, 100,000 words is not that difficult. But the work involved is a lot of reading. You need to, and that's where the Institute library helps. Journal articles, government reports, NGO reports, court cases, academic articles and books. You have to read those. You need to have read widely. That is called the literature review. Then you need to apply that knowledge to the question of your topic.
Yeah.
And that is how it's done. But the only teaching involved is our research training seminars. There is some teaching involved in that, but it's not like if you pass or fail, you're kicked out of the program. We don't know how you did in your research training. It is entirely up to you.
Great, thank you. I think that's really important clarification there. So thank you for that. So the next question we have here, can I take the PhD if I'm from a civil law country rather than a common law country?
Absolutely. We have people who are taking PhDs from the Dutch tradition, from Japanese tradition, from the Chinese tradition, from the civil law tradition. Certainly, we've had a number of Europeans. Now, saying that, if you have a civil law background and you're suddenly going to do a PhD that focuses on a problem in common law, you may run into a bit of difficulty because your background is not in common law. It really depends on your topic. But most students don't find that difficult at all. But absolutely, we take all legal traditions and we don't discriminate based on that at all.
Great, thank you. So the next question we have is, are there many opportunities to do like placements on this PhD, and does it offer much networking opportunity?
Placements, we don't have an official placement program, although it's a very interesting idea. And I think in the future of PhD education, that's where it should go. But your supervisor, I'll give you an example. One of our students is working with a supervisor who's doing reports for the United Nations. She has been asked to help him. Another student worked with Nora at the information Policy Institute. She was actually paid part-time to do work in preparing for conferences and helping with the center. So there are some opportunities like that. But Legal London, there are a number of places where they'd be dying for a legal volunteer. I mean, this is when I was a student, I volunteered for a death penalty project. It is indeed possible to do that.
Yeah.
Not paid, however. I mean, there isn't, it's difficult to find paid placements anywhere. For example, the UN doesn't even pay. You have to do it for free.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's
Yeah.
really interesting.
Which just really always bothered me, but unfortunately,
Yeah.
it's the case.
Yeah, I mean, that is the world in which we're living in. But thank you for that answer. We've got another question here. You've touched upon it a bit, but they ask, is distance learning option as effective as studying on campus? Will I miss out on seminars and conferences, etc.?
No, you will not miss out on any of the training. There may be a few seminars that are in person that you might miss, which would, I think that's the only detriment, is sometimes people want to have meetings in person. We generally don't encourage it in the PhD program, I've got to say. We encourage people doing our meetings online so that everybody has access. And also because we're working globally, the people in my Access to Justice project are in Australia and Canada. They're not coming to a meeting in London. And our supervisors don't necessarily, and this is really important, so listen carefully, our supervisors don't always live in London.
Yeah,
I've got a supervisor in Warwick, I've got a supervisor in Nottingham, I've got a supervisor in Malaysia, I've got a supervisor in three supervisors in Canada, one in the United States. I mean, so your supervisor may not be in the country that IALS is located in. Now, the only difficulty there, and that does sometimes happen, is it could be a time. If I have an Australian student and a Canadian supervisor, the time difference is quite extreme. So there could be. I do try not to have that happen. We have a lot of supervisors in Europe and students in Europe, so it's only an hour difference or a couple of hours difference. Yeah. But you know, if we have an Asian and a North American, it can run into time differences. But no, all our supervisions, research degrees committee, all of it, it's online.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. The next question we have here, is there an age limit to studying for a PhD? Can somebody be too old?
I'm laughing because I did my PhD in my 40s, but in those days, 20 years ago, that was considered a barrier. I was told at 44 that I was too old. And
Wow.
it's laughable because I've had a whole career after that.
Yeah.
I have to say I'm much older than that now, and I don't think there is any barrier. The only barrier I would alert people to who are over 65, I think it's over 60 or 65, you have difficulty accessing student loans. Apparently, the British government, we've just found out, has said that you should have your own assets by that age and you shouldn't be relying on student loans. The second difficulty could be in employment. They're not supposed to discriminate. I should be able to apply for a job over 65, but in some countries that would be a barrier. It would. It's not quite as liberal as it is here in the United Kingdom. It may be a difficulty to find a full-time job after a certain age. But we have students in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I don't think I have a student in their 70s yet, but I don't doubt that will happen. But we have students in all of those age groups.
Thank you. That's really good to hear. And I hope that provides inspiration for everybody listening to this.
Well, I'm a big fan of later life learning. I happen to think that sometimes you've had a whole career and you want to do this project. For me, I was a lawyer in Kingston, Ontario for 18 years, and I had a book in my head. I wanted to write this book, and I finally had enough savings paid in my bank account that I could go and do it. So, you know, often it takes a while before you're able to do it.
Yeah, you're right. Totally. There are like financial barriers that later in life you don't have, but in your 20s or 30s you do. So the next question, it's quite an important one. What level of support does a supervisor or tutor give at PhD level?
Depends on the supervisor. I'm not going to say supervisors are different. some supervisors are very busy and you'll only see them in their monthly meeting. Other supervisors will become the best friend you've ever had. It really depends on the supervisor. And sometimes if you require a lot of support, you should let me know if you're applying and saying, I'd really like somebody who's hands-on, who I can meet with, who I can talk to about my life, my career. But we have supervisors like that. One of our mature students, she's older than her supervisor, but her supervisor is the nicest woman, and they meet all the time for coffee and talk. And I know there's a really special relationship developing there.
Oh.
And that was the case for me and my supervisor as well. We became best friends. I was his age. So it really depends on the supervisor. There are some that are more hands-off and more formal, but any supervisor will take their job seriously. They will, they will want to meet with you. They will want to talk to you. They will want to be as supportive as they can.
Great, thank you. That's a perfect answer. So another question we've got here: what career opportunities are there for me once I've completed my PhD, and what do other students go on to do?
Well, that's an excellent question. It used to be that a PhD was the route to becoming a professor like myself, an academic route. And 20, 30 years ago, most people who started a PhD would end up working in a university as a lecturer. That is not the case now. In fact, in the legal business, I've got to tell you an anecdote. One of my students in Hong Kong said to become a partner in a major law firm in Hong Kong, you need a doctorate. So it's not just about going into academia. People go into government. My students have gone into government. They've gone into non-governmental organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, other students working for the European Union, for international organizations. Student of mine's working for the UN. That's difficult to get into, though. There are no promises about the UN. That's a very difficult, especially now that Trump is cutting funding. But there are a number of routes. But the other one that is extremely interesting, that students who have got backgrounds in commercial law, it's often major commercial firms need legal advice now. It's not just going into a law firm, but some students with doctorates do. They practice law, they become barristers and solicitors, or the equivalent in their countries, and they are considered experts in a particular field of law. It is a route to a number of positions. Now, I will say, and I have to be honest about this, that academia in the UK right now is going through a contraction. They are not, because we haven't had as many international students, it's more difficult to find a job in an academic department than it used to be. But it is still possible. A number of my PhD students have gotten full-time lecturer positions in universities as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Susan. That's a great answer. So we have a question here. I don't know if you'll know the answer to it, but I'll pose it to you. As a University of London alumni, I believe that there is a discount to first-year tuition fees. Is the discount extended to further years?
We're still trying to resolve this issue, and I'm afraid I don't have an answer yet. But I have been alerted to this issue, and I'm working through the doctoral center to see if we can resolve it. But as of right now, in fact, there's not a discount for University of London worldwide students to study for a PhD. It doesn't exist. And we're trying to resolve that, because I do think there should be a discount, but it hasn't been resolved at this point.
Okay, but to the answer of that question, asker of that question, even I would say we can post a link to the fees and funding page, just so you can
that could be
information about fees and funding for your chosen PhD.
I just talk about that for a second, because I think that's an important question, because someone else will have this in their mind. Can I get funding to do a PhD is a question I get all the time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the answer is probably not. Legal PhDs are particularly difficult because, quite frankly, people pay to do their PhDs, and they pay a lot of money. And often it's considered that lawyers are rich, so there would be no reason to fund them. That's not true. I know that. I've had students from across the globe who could really do with assistance, but we do not have scholarship programs for the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. They don't exist. Sometimes students receive funding from their own countries. There are some charitable organizations that offer funding. Students apply all over, but it is the funding. It used to be that you could find funding to do a doctorate, but nowadays that is almost very, very, very rare. I think one of our students received some Canadian funding to get to do their PhD. Another one is working in Indigenous issues and received funding from, I think, the Indigenous community to help. But you have to be creative. I mean, you literally have to look at your own country, look at charitable organizations, but otherwise it's not possible.
Okay, thank you for saying that. That's really helpful. We've also got another, you have semi-answered this question, but I will ask it again. We've got somebody asking, as a Canadian, is there a requirement to travel to London at any time during the PhD program except for the oral defense?
Even for the oral defense, the good news is that it used to be, and it may still be on the web, so I've got to fix that. Used to be you had to come for your examination. Now, again, with our examiners living all over the world, that didn't seem to be very useful. Sometimes the examiners would like to meet the student, but that's very much on the student to make the decision. So if you're flying from Canada to do your examination, you could well say to us, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm a distance student. You've got to provide me with a distance examination, and that is our obligation to do so. Saying that, there's one time you should come. I've got to tell you that the graduation ceremony for the School of Advanced Studies is one of the nicest ones I've ever been to. They often have very famous actors who get, this time it was Samuel West, who get honorary doctorates and give fabulous speeches. And it's well worth coming to London to graduate at Senate House. Really is quite an experience. You get gowned by the Chancellor. It is, and I regret the fact that I didn't do that. And I really urge people to consider, if they're getting their doctorate, go to your graduation ceremony if you can.
Yeah, definitely. As a marketing team member, we actually volunteer at graduations for SAS, and it's a lovely day. It's really nice for everybody involved. So we're getting to our last 2 questions. Got a question here. I feel like I know the answer to it, but I'll ask it. What are the expectations in terms of time commitments for studying a PhD? Can you have a full-time or part-time job at the same time?
Well, that's one of the best questions we've gotten all day. What a good question. Thank you very much. And I should have mentioned this. A number of our students are working full-time, but let me tell you, you do not, and a big not in capital letters, sign up for a full-time PhD when you're working full-time. You would kill yourself. You could certainly do a part-time PhD, but because there's no hours of the week expectation, but you just couldn't possibly finish your research and your thesis if you were working full-time and do it in 3 years. I think you really need more time. Working part-time, I did, and got my PhD in 3 years. Lots of people work part-time and can do a full-time PhD. And in fact, it helped me. I was working part-time for the London School of Economics as a counselor and a teacher. And it helped me because it got me away from my thesis. For a few hours a day, I didn't sit and stare at the screen. I got a break. I got to go to school. I got to interact with other people. So I strongly urge people to consider working part-time if they're doing a full-time PhD. Yeah. But as I said, if you're working full-time, please, please, please don't only do a part-time PhD.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. So we've got another question here. What is the best way to get in touch with staff to discuss PhD study?
Yes. So it's, if you could put it in the chat, I'm afraid I didn't put it on the slide. So it's susan.breau at SAS UK.
Cool. Great. I think my colleague will post a link to your email address in the chat box so that it is available. In fact,
the best thing to do is talk to me first. And I'm happy to do that. I even set up Teams calls if people want to talk to me
That's great.
face to face. I'm happy to do that as well. We get a lot of applications, so you may wait a week or so before I can get to you to see you, but I'm very happy to do that.
Great, thank you. That's perfect. Thank you so much. And then, so the last question is a good question to sum everything up. Do you have any advice for what constitutes a successful PhD application?
Well, I think, as I said, my big advice is, one, make sure you have the qualifications. In other words, a master's degree, a legal background in either your undergraduate or master's. And second, do your CV carefully. I didn't mention that earlier, but sometimes you may not have done as well in your master's degree. For example, your marks may not be that good. But you have been working for 20 years as a lawyer in a law practice doing exactly what you want to do your thesis on. Yeah. So having a developed CV that I can look at is important. Okay? The third thing is, and the most important thing, is the research proposal. And there are no shortcuts to that. You've literally got to do the research. Make sure you've got a bibliography. It's a developed research proposal. That is the most important thing. I send you, by the way, guidelines on how to prepare it, but it is the most important thing to have that developed research proposal.
Great. Okay, thank you. That's perfect advice. I'm sure everybody watching this will be very relieved to know that. That is the end of our webinar. There are no more questions. So I just want to thank everybody for attending the PhD at the Institute of Advanced Legal Study webinar. My colleague will post in the chat box a link to our inquiries page where you can ask any questions that you might have not thought of yet. And this is one final reminder that the application deadline for the September intake is 31st of July. So I hope to look forward to welcoming you at the School of Advanced Study in September. Thank you, Susan.
No problem. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.